Once again, I will record our time together. So welcome to the third meeting of the Plan Giving track that we've launched. And I think it's the first one that I didn't schedule for either a major day in the church calendar or in the United States political calendar. So welcome to everybody who could make the regularly scheduled meeting. And I think I'm just going to kick it over to Mitzi. So thanks for being back with us, Mitzi.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here, and it's fun to see everybody. And some like pretty stout green there, Steve. What? I'm not sure what that is, but I like it. That's awesome. I've never had like an actual leprechaun on a Zoom meeting before. Okay, so let's do a check-in. There's a lot of you. Let's just do a check-in on the first kind of 2 weeks of homework and see how we're doing there before we dive into the endowment piece, because I do think that what you decided in those 2 levels of homework will make this week easier. If we have already done those things. So the first is just kind of like a little show of hand, because I have you, most of you on my screen, it's 2 swipes, but show of hands, how many of you have your team? Like how many of you feel like you have your team? Great, Melanie, good. Steve, John, good. Okay, that's good. So if you don't have your team yet, I would suggest think about that here for just a second and post some comments in the chat box about what your hangups are, and then we can address some of those hangups or things that are causing that to be delayed, because your team really is a critical piece for making this happen and keeping everybody on task and moving forward. So use the chat box for that, and Mike can help us navigate the chat box, because remember, I'm totally ADHD. The second thing is last month, our homework was to establish how, not to have your gift policy done. If you do, great, but to establish how you're going to create your gift policy. And it was kind of 1 of 3 choices. You can, veer off to the left or right if you want to on the choices, but whether to start from scratch or use samples, whether to have an ELCA Foundation gift planner come and help you, or for a GSB consultant to help you. So show of hands, how many of you have figured out how you're going to do that? Just so I have a pulse on how we're doing with homework. Great, Kim, Heidi, Jason, Buzz, good. Okay, that's good progress, thanks. I hope that is starting to feel like some relief for you, and that you're moving forward through this and it's starting to shape up and come together. So just another quick question, because it helps me frame some things. How many of you decided to start from scratch or to use a sample? No judgments, I just am wondering. Okay, Barbara, thank you. Okay, wait, let me swipe. Keep your hand up for just a second. Let me swipe to the second. Okay, all right, good. So does that mean the rest of you kind of are thinking about using somebody to help you do that process? Nod your heads. Great, I love it. Oh, this is great. Thanks, guys. Good participation. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so that leads us into this week. And this week, month, we're going to talk about our endowment policy or endowment bylaws, procedures. Most congregations refer to them and establish them as bylaws. And so, so that I may say policy or procedure or bylaw, just whatever is your context, just know that I'm talking about the same thing. So as a refresher, our gift policy, every single gift that comes in through the ministry comes in through the gift policy. And then some of those gifts, especially planned gifts, so gifts, legacy gifts, gifts that come from an estate when someone has passed on, or from assets that they're sort of relieving themselves of before they pass on, some of those can funnel then through the gift policy into the endowment bylaws. And so if the gift policy is set up in a way that a gift is going to be endowed, then it ends up in the endowment. And so those documents need to do and answer a couple things, okay? The first thing I want you to know about this document is that it has to be contextual. It has to be contextual. If you live in, or you are part of a congregation that doesn't have a cemetery, but somebody's told you that you should have a cemetery fund in your endowment, well, that's not contextual. I mean, that's a little bit of a stretch. But what I want you to know is the congregation has to get it. They have to know that this is my church and this is what we do, and this endowment makes that possible. And so it has to be contextual. Throw out all the things that people have insisted for you that every good endowment should have. There's some practices that every good endowment should have and fund. There are some suggestions, but if it doesn't work for your congregation and it feels like you're forcing it, or it feels like too many people at the table don't get it, then it's probably really not contextual. And if that's happening, then it's going to diminish trust and it's going to make it harder to secure gifts. So we really want to make sure that it is contextual, okay? That's the first thing. And by being contextual, it has to be mission focused. So if you have goals in your congregation, if you have objectives or outcomes in your congregation that you are measuring that you want to be able to do, then the endowment should speak to that. It should line up nicely with that. It should not be opposing. It should not be counter to that. It should be right in line with that. And so all good things start with mission and vision and goals. And so your endowment bylaws should as well. Okay. So that's the first thing. And then what does it need to cover? So the first section of a bylaw is going to include governance. Who decides how this money is used? Who decides where it goes, how it's invested? How are these people selected? Who decides? Who votes on them? Who makes sure that they are doing what they're supposed to? How long can they serve? Those are all things that need to be included and addressed in the bylaws in the governance section at the very beginning. That establishes trust with the members of the congregation. Now, I have sat across from plenty of endowment teams where the same person who gave the gift still controls the money and thinks of it as theirs. And they decide how much is going to come out every year and how they're going to invest it. And if that is your situation, you should be seeing red flags right now. Like they should be blinking red lights at you. That should not be the case. It should be a rotating group of people so that no one group or person or family has control over the money, because it's really still theirs if that's the case. It's like saying, oh yeah, I'm going to give this to you, but not really. It's a gift. and when it is gifted, it then belongs to the congregation for governance and use, okay? So if you have a situation like that, Mike or I would be happy to help you navigate that, because that can be really ugly and cause lots of problems in a congregation to try to fix. But we've both done it, and we're okay being the bad guys and gals. And so if you are sitting there thinking, oh yeah, we got a problem, that's okay. We can help you with that, okay? All right, so first section is governance, okay? The second section is acceptance. So just because somebody says they want this money to be endowed, again, just like our gift policy, doesn't mean that it's the right gift for the congregation to be endowed, all right? Maybe it's completely uncontextual. Maybe it has a counter mission and vision purpose. So in your bylaws, it needs to say, what kind of things does this pay for? Like, what kind of things does it support? What kind of gifts are gonna be okay to be endowed in this place, okay? And that acceptance piece, a lot of times that's really kind of, it's already funneled through the gift policy, so it's kind of been taken care of. But it is good. It is good to make sure that that is included as language for members of the congregation, so that they understand what their opportunities are. It can be seen as limits. It helps you create limits, but it's really opportunities for members of the congregation to be able to give specific things for specific reasons, okay? The next piece is investment, okay? Now, this gets a little tricky because every congregation has different gifts inside of the members of their congregation. So some congregations I've been in have people who are like so savvy when it comes to investments, and like there are people on the team who are literally picking the stocks. Like there's all sorts of, I know Mike is shaking his head. Everybody look at Mike right now. So that happens, but it is not best practice, friends. It is not best practice. Best practice is to get outside advice on this type of thing, so that, again, no one person or group or family feels like it's their money, okay? Because then it becomes this game. If we could all pick the right stocks all the time, we'd all be sitting on the beach. We wouldn't be doing this. And so we need advice, we need counsel, we need help, and quite frankly, we need one degree of separation. And so what we encourage is for that policy and piece not to be so complicated. Like, it doesn't have to include 60% of this and 30% of this and 15% of this and blah, 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 blah. Just say, this is where we're going to give it to these folks to invest. These are the types of organizations that we're willing to invest it in, or to allow us to help us, like the ELCA Foundation, for example, or one of your local community foundations or something like that. And then let them do that work. And then you all, as a congregation, have the joy of giving it away. That's the greatest part of it, okay? So that's the investment, the investment piece. And if you work with a gift planner or with Mike and I to help with that, we can talk you through, like, we have some questions on a worksheet that we can ask you to help you navigate that language so that it's super simple for the members of the congregation. Because again, the more complicated this is, the more people you have dropping off who think, oh, I can't do that, I can't do that. You gotta keep it super simple, okay? The next piece, and this is the most exciting piece, is the distribution. Now, I wanna start by telling you a story. sat across from an endowment team who had been managing an endowment for over 17 years. And they had never given away a dime. And so I sat down with them and said, hey, tell me about your endowment. What, and they started talking. Well, what do you do with it? Oh, well, we're not allowed to do anything with it yet. Okay, say more about that. Well, it has to get to $250,000 before we can give anything away. Okay, how old is it? 17 years. And where's it at? 140,000. How much started it? 80,000. Okay, so for 17 years, you've had between $80,000 and $140,000 sitting there doing nothing. Does that make you want to give? Does that ever indicate that you're going to reach $250,000, which is what you say the corpus has to be? No, it doesn't. Friends, they changed that and they're almost at $250,000 now. Okay, it's been 2 or 3 years. So there's your example, right? You have to do something with it. That's why the donor gave it. The donor did not give it to you to hoard. The donor gave it to you to change lives and to do ministry. And so that's what we're called to do with it. That is our responsibility and our stewardship. Now, we can do that responsibly. And one of the things I like to do with congregations is explain some language. So there's language like principle, there's language like corpus, there's language like investment earnings, rolling averages. What a lot of congregations get hung up on is that the amount of the pot, let's call it a pot, right? Because there's lots of financial language around corpus and principle. They don't want it to go below the original gift. That's where they get hung up. They don't want it to go below the original gift. But let's do an analysis here. If somebody gives $100,000, what if in your endowment, instead of saying it can't go below $100,000, what you say is every year we're going to give 4% of a rolling 3 or 5 year average. Let me tell you what that does for the world, okay? Not what it does for you as a congregation, but what it does for the world. So I just heard this morning that there are millions of people who cannot pay their mortgages. I was listening to the news, and that was the top story today that I heard. And if by chance during this pandemic, the market also tanks, there are lots of endowment bylaws set up that you can't do anything. We didn't earn anything this year, so we can't do anything with it. Right now, when the world needs it most, we wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So instead of boxing yourselves in like that, what if instead you said, we can take a 4 to 5%, this is what is sort of standard practice and recommended from financial experts, of a rolling 3 to 5 year average. I have $100,000, how much are you going to give away this year? So it drops below a little bit this year. It's going to go back up, right? And you're still gifting to the world in the time of greatest need. As someone who has worked on behalf of the lost and the broken and the outcast, that is a tremendous gift to the world. So when you're thinking about distribution, I don't want you to simply think about, well, what can we spend it on? And that's important. That's something you do need to think about, and it needs to be contextual. But you also need to think about how can you do the most good with it, okay? And so those are questions that your gift planner or one of the GSB consultants can, and if you have a good financial person in your congregation who gets that, who can walk you through that process and help you think about those things and navigate those things. Because every year, if you don't give anything away for a couple years because it went below, guess what you also didn't do? You didn't remind anybody in your congregation that this matters, that it does something, that you're using it, that you're making a difference, that if they gave to it too, man, they would be making a difference, and that would be their legacy. So when you're thinking about it, think about every year, every single year, make a big deal out of giving it away. This is what the legacy of Mr. Jones did. This is our church's legacy now. This is what we do. This is how we care for our neighbors and our community. And if that is the story you are telling, friends, you will get to those numbers very quickly. People will want to leave to you. I promise. You won't necessarily have to even be asking. You should still ask, but they will want to do it because they know it matters. So when you're thinking about your endowment and what you want to do with it and how you want it to work, the most important thing you need to be asking is, how are we going to make a difference? How are we going to serve God's people? And if you can answer that, all that other stuff is going to fall into place. You have to get it down on paper, but it's going to fall into place, okay? And then I alluded to this, but the last thing on my list to make sure that you are considering is built-in intentional. Everybody write down the word intentional and circle it on your paper, intentional storytelling. You can give 4% away every year, but if you don't tell anybody that you've done that, nobody will know. You tell the story of what you do with it, and you tell the story of who gave it and why they gave it and the difference they believed it would make to give that gift. Those are the stories that need to be told. So when you're thinking about, as an SAS congregation, telling stories, you need to intentionally be cycling in planned giving stories into that process. And then I want to say one more thing about this, because this is something that gets hung up on a lot in congregations around planned giving. Well, we're doing a capital campaign. Or, you know, we really need to work on our budget a little bit more. And so we're, you know, asking people to do planned gift right now. That's too much to ask them. Okay, let's talk about the three-legged stool. So the strongest stool has three legs. It has a leg for your tithing, your annual giving that comes in on a regular basis. It has a leg of major gifts, and it has a leg of planned giving. A lot of people fall in a kind of a primary in one of those three categories, but they all can give in all those ways. And those legs are separate and different. You don't chop off one leg so that another leg is bigger. You give all the legs equal time and energy, and stability comes from that. This is different money. You're not asking them to write a check to your endowment out of their IRA that they're going to use to pay their bills. You're saying, when you die and go to heaven and you don't need this money anymore, it has to go somewhere. If you don't decide where it's going to go, Uncle Sam will decide for you. I promise. That's how it works. And so you can help them decide, and leaving a legacy to the congregation is a gift to them and to your ministry. It has mutual benefits. And so having an endowment ready, you don't want to get the gift and then have to scramble and write the policies. You want to have the policies in place so you get the gift. It is not a chicken and an egg question. Get the policy and the bylaws in place and the gifts will come, okay, if you talk about it and tell stories. So that's the last piece, is the storytelling. That is so, so critical. And the first story that you tell is that you have an endowment, like you actually have it. That's the first story that you tell, okay? Or that you're establishing it, or that you're working on it. All these things that you're doing, like give a little update. Hey, I just was on a meeting with blah, 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 and we learned all about endowment bylaws, and there's a team in the congregation that's going to be working on that, and we're so excited to be able to offer this to the congregation. The story starts today. So that's the presentation. That's what I wanted to make sure I covered. So let me pause there and see what kind of questions you have, and then I'll give you, well, actually, let me go ahead and give you your homework. I want to go ahead and give you your homework because that's probably going to answer a question or two. So your homework this time is basically exactly like last time for your gift policy. What I want you to do is I want your group, because most of you raised your hand, so you have your group. I want you to have your group decide how you are going to draft or review your current or needed bylaws, okay? And the three primary options are from scratch or with samples, and that will take 6 to 18, yes, 18 months, okay? That has to go through some hoops like congregational voting and some things like that, so it can take a while. Number 2, have the ELCA gift policy, or have the ELCA gift planner help you. My average time helping a congregation create their bylaws was 3 to 5 people, 2.5 hours at most. We had every question answered and I turned them back a template, okay? And it was contextual. And then the third is to have a GSB consultant help you. It's the same, about 2.5 hours. Okay, so your homework for this time is to decide how you are going to get your your bylaws drafted or review them. And if you're here, if you're learning, I would strongly advise that sometimes a review is better done by scrapping and starting over. And a gift policy or a gift planner or one of us would actually kind of do that process with you. And one of the coachings would be, if something's working in your congregation already, when you answer this question, that's what you need to tell me, is that it's working already. Because a lot of times what I've seen is a congregation has bylaws, it's not working, it's completely stagnant, it's so cumbersome, it's so complicated, but they feel like they have to hold on to it. And it's like, it's hanging them up. And sometimes it's just, quite frankly, very freeing to just say, you know what, let's just set that over here and let's try something new and let's see how those two worlds come together now. And that really can help get some wheels rolling that weren't rolling before, okay? And then the last thing is your second article will be coming out, and it is called Tithing from the Grave. That sounds kind of weird, maybe, but the truth is you have people in your congregation right now who tithe, who know that when they die, that's going to go away. But if they leave an endowment, if they leave a legacy gift, they can tithe forever. They can tithe into perpetuity. And people really resonate with that. They like what that means. They like how that feels to them. And it helps provide them a sense of peace. And it really is a gift for people to know that that's an option. And so use that story, how it works best for you and your congregation. But that's a story that these are all true stories, by the way, in these little monthly stories that you're getting. So, okay. So now I'll pause. Oh, goodness. It looks like the chat box is full, Mike. So I'm going to let you guide me.
A lot of it's for me, just kind of reiterating points and throwing in my own comments along the way. So,
okay.
There's two from Donald that I'll invite you to get to in just a second. I want to add a story of my own because it was so much fun. And it reiterates Mitzi's point that you can do this alongside other work. So we were doing a capital campaign for a congregation. I won't mention it at this point, but and within the campaign, we were also inviting estate gifts. So we didn't have a huge goal around it, but we were inviting them. And a widow in the congregation told the pastor that she couldn't afford to make a gift to the campaign, but she would leave a little something in her estate for the congregation. Well, she passed away recently, and the congregation has been notified of a $900,000 gift. So I think she probably could.
Little something.
I think she could have afforded a little something for the campaign too, but you know what? I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to celebrate the gift. So fun story, but also very clearly articulates that it's okay to ask for both because it's different money for people.
Mm-hmm.
And it clearly does that. I have some definite feelings around everything that Mitzi talked about today. The church, experiences a place in the IRS tax code that it doesn't have to do some things because of because of who we are. If we were public charities, we would have to distribute 5% from our endowments. I think we should follow that guideline. I have known congregations that live such a scarcity mindset with their endowments that they're giving like 2.7% or something like that. They could really make a bigger impact. And I like to say, I think God would be really happy if we ran out of money in our endowment because we gave 5% every year, because if the market's that bad, the world needs it.
The world needs it.
And so I think we should just do 5% and let the financial people just enjoy that for a minute. Because I think we just need to do that. And then just, one other quick thing, well, it wouldn't be quick. So I make sure that you set up, I think Mitzi might get into this with Donald's first question, but make sure you set the endowment up that it does some ministry blessing stuff for you. We are not community foundations. Our endowments shouldn't just be given away to the world. Okay, that's the job of a community foundation. I think we're supposed to have an impact on the world, but your endowment should also strengthen your ministry. And that's why I like endowment policies that do facility care until you've got facility care covered, and then you cap that endowment and move on. But Mitzi said it at the beginning, know your mission, know what you exist for, and your endowment ought to bless that. And if your endowment is just to give away, relook at your mission and make sure it's faith forming or somehow advances your mission in some way, and you haven't become a community foundation. I'm seeing a lot of that, and it just kind of bothers me. So that's why I put the microphone here for a second and said it. So I'll kick it back to you, Mitzi.
Yeah. So what is Donald's question? Because I do want to say something about that, but if it's in the context of his question, I'll frame it.
So some folks are concerned that the endowment fund ties their hands from using it, to help the ministry.
Okay.
So I might have just gotten at that a little bit, but.
Yeah. So, okay, Donald, this is going to be a long answer for me. But I want to back up and I want to start with the word transparency. Okay. So I think what I have run across, I've seen congregations who have said, okay, we're going to use 100% of our endowment for our operating budget. And then everything the congregation gives, we're going to give away. Like, I've seen that side. I've also seen, well, we don't want the congregation to stop giving, so we're going to only use tithes and offerings for our operating budget, and we're going to give away 100%. I've seen that spectrum all the way across, okay? What I think is the issue when it comes to the concern about tying our hands or using too much is you have to know who you are, and you have to be clear in your bylaws what you do with this money. Where the concern is about tying hands, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is when we say we're going to do one thing with it, and then we manipulate the situation to do something else with it, okay? In the worksheet that I would do with a congregation, I would ask, is there a percentage that you want to be able to be used for maintenance? Is there a percentage that you want to be able to be used for this? Is there, and Mike's idea of capping it, like, oh, if, like, so you don't have the $400,000 cemetery fund that you could build a moat with, right? Like, there is a place where that's a true thing. It happened. You can build in caps. That's one of the reasons why we recommend you review your bylaws annually, because your ministry changes. Whose ministry changed in the last 12 months, right? Like, all of us. And if we're not reviewing our policies on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden when the ministry changes, we decide, oh, we're going to review this so we can tweak it and do what we want with it, that doesn't establish trust. It doesn't establish confidence. But if we're reviewing it every single year in line with what is happening in our congregations, then we can be contextual and we can be mission focused. And people need to know that. They need to know that. And you need to tell the story about how this fund paid for a youth minister who like came in and completely revamped the youth program, and now you've got 50 kids doing blah, 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 right? Like, that's an operating budget expense, but it's doing ministry. And so how you frame it and how you envision it makes a difference. And then how you tell the story, if you don't tell the story, people will fill in the blanks. And that's where you run into problems. Did that help, Donald? Okay, thank you.
I just had a congregation teach me a new way to do this. They didn't want to have multiple funds as far as a general endowment goes. So what they've declared is that, you know, and they're gonna pay out a 5% of a 3-year rolling average, which I love, by the way.
Right.
What they're going to do is the first $500,000 that is received into their endowment will be utilized for new initiatives. The next $2 million will be utilized for facility care. And then after that, it goes back to just general purposes and new initiatives. So they're able to not have a separate facility fund and a separate new initiatives fund and that sort of thing. Just, it takes a couple more sentences in the bylaw, but I thought that was a really creative way to handle that. And on the management side, it's just a ton easier. I think there's one fund, you know, and so that was actually just 2 weeks ago. This congregation kind of taught me that. So Donald had another question about bylaws not aligning with the church constitution, and I think that's a case where you just got to get somebody looking at your constitution and bylaws. And Mitzi mentioned that it's the whole congregational identity piece, which so much of life in the church today comes back to, not just from the stewardship side, but from so many things. And I think it's time for some intentional, who are we? Why do we exist? And let's get our governing documents in alignment, or else it's going to be hard to thrive as an organization. So Donald, I don't remember which synod you're in, but if you type that in the box, I'll help align you with who you want to contact at the synod office to help with some of that. So
Yeah, and I just a little also plug there too, Donald. One of the ways I've seen that really be a hiccup is when constitutional bylaws say that you have to have a congregational vote to spend $2,000 or something like that. Like that is where it really becomes, quite frankly, the word I would use is crippling for the congregation. And so those are things that I would evaluate, and that's a simple evaluation for the Constitution. But the bylaws based on the way we establish bylaws in a congregation, the bylaws govern the money that's in the endowment.
Great news. Bob Abrams, an attorney, is great at this. So contact Bob at the Senate office. I see Katie Kerrigan nodding her head. Your Senate office can be tremendously helpful for you in this.
Mm-hmm. Great. Other questions? What else do I need?
Maybe throw Bob's email address in there too. So Kim's asking some questions on her bylaws don't currently require distributions. I told her they should.
Oh yeah.
And I would get to where it's a 3-year trailing average personally. 5 years. Once you have 5 years, that spreads out even further. That's great with me as well. But still, in the first year, you distribute on the December 31st value. In the second year, you have 2 December 31sts. In the third year, you've got 3. So your bylaws can build that up in that way too. That's how I tend to write that. So.
Mm-hmm.
And Kim, did I mention 5%?
It's not going to hurt you to do 5%. I mean, yeah.
I just have to throw that out there every chance I get, Kim. So thanks. Other questions?
Other questions? At this point, if you want to raise your hand, I'll call on you and you can just ask if you're not like a typer person. Okay, Carol? Just make sure you unmute yourself before you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
We were able to download an ELCA draft for our gift policy from the ELCA Foundation. Do they have anything like that for an endowment policy?
So they do. Yes, you should be able to get that as well. But I would also call the gift planner in your area. Where are you, Carol?
St. Paul Lutheran in Reading, Ohio.
Reading, Ohio. Okay. Oh, okay.
The Southeast Michigan planner is helping them right now.
Perfect. Okay.
Blanking on her name, but she's great.
Is it Patty? Is her name
Yes,
Patty?
Patricia Harding.
Patricia Harding. Yeah, she's
Yes.
great. Yeah. So so I would, instead of trying to find it on the ELCA Foundation's website, I would just call Patricia and say, hey, I just sat through a workshop with Mitzi and Mike, and we want to create our endowment bylaws and our gift policy. Please walk us through that. And she can do that over Zoom. And I promise you, you will love that process as opposed to hating it. Because doing it on your own can be just really cumbersome. And she doesn't cost anything.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. Okay, raise your hand. Let's see. Oh, that's not a hand. That's my little cursor. That looks like a hand. I don't see any hands. Oh my gosh, this is usually the topic I get like a bazillion questions about. You guys have got it. You know exactly what you're doing. Or you're just absolutely terrified and afraid to ask.
Or they're just going to listen to you and do it your way. So that'll be great.
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome. Really? No questions? Okay, Kim, do you have a question? Oh, no, you're reading. I gotcha. I'm learning Zoom language.
And I think Mitzi said this, but you do these now, even if you don't have any money yet. It's when the donor knows what you're going to do with it and that you're going to be held to that, then you're much more likely to get these gifts. Occasionally we hear the stories of getting them without these in place. That is, that is not typical. And so what we need to do is have this in place, and then that will help to spur people to consider this. And it left us earlier, but Kim asked the question about who should be on the team. And my response was like I led this at my congregation, and the 4 people I put on the team were the 4 people I wanted gifts from. So I had 2 charter members and 2 other people that I knew had significant means and loved the church deeply. And so, I drove the process, they helped me out, and we had 5 gifts in place by the end of the time putting the bylaws together. So that's who I had in place. That's also why you don't do this yourself, because if you do it yourself, you get your gift. If you do it with 5 others, you get 5 other gifts. And that's just a tactic to move forward. And then you got 5 people that can stand up and say, we've done it, will you join us? Okay. So, and by the way, that's part of the exercise for me. Like, as these get adopted, then you need to have somebody starting to say, I did it, join me. And, it shouldn't just be on deaf ears. And I would plant that seed at every meeting throughout. Hey, as we're working on this, remember, we need to be working towards including this in our estate plans too. And that will move you to getting these gifts. So.
Yeah, and I think also what Mike is saying is a little permission giving. What I hear a lot of times from congregations is, well, we need to ask our financial people and our lawyers to be on this committee. Yeah, if they're going to leave a gift, but you have other expertise that can walk you through this. What you want are generous people, mission-minded people. To be on this group, and lawyers and financial people certainly are generous and mission-minded. But that should not be the criteria for this. You remember, you want this document to make sense to your average layperson in your congregation.
And while people are being shy, please think of another question or 2. We've got 13 more minutes if you want them. I'm working with a Presbyterian church in Florida on some of this, and the head of their trustees wrote an article for their annual report that says, hey, you people ought to leave a gift to the church. I said, you know what? You need to leave a gift to the church and then invite people to join you.
Join you.
Be very careful with that. Mitzi,
Jason, yeah, I see Jason's hand.
Hey, thank you. I've been at a church that had an endowment previously. We don't at our church yet. And part of the way they ran that was that you apply. So people would apply for, they had it set up where a quarter went to scholarships, a quarter went to building, like they had it kind of, and then you had different groups apply, and then there was a group that would decide around that. Is that generally how that works, or is it there's the part of the body decides where that money goes? How does that function?
Yeah, that's a great distribution question, Jason. So that again, I think leans back to contextual. So if your congregation is in, downtown metropolis, ginormous city, Donald, I'm exaggerating again, ginormous, then you may need to say, ooh, we're going to get lots of requests. And so we're going to, basically what you're describing is a grant application process. And so that's one of the things the gift planner, Mike and I can talk with you about, is what should that look like? How complicated do you want it to be? How much checking back in do you want to have? Like, there's a lot of things that as a congregation you have to consider administratively around that process. You can have all or none or some of the distribution granted. some of it can be like an automatic turnover to go, like there are lots of options there. And so again, I would say that needs to be contextual. And you can always, if you are adjusting and reviewing your bylaws every year, you can navigate that along the way as need arises. I worked with a congregation that got an out of the blue $4.7 million gift. Out of the blue. They had no idea it was coming. The man had not been in the congregation since college. Okay. And they didn't have a bylaw. They didn't have anything. Like they literally had to start from scratch. Well, they're doing their 5%-ish. So they're giving away a ton of money every year. And so they do have a partial grant process for that. A lot of it depends on how much you're giving away as well. I will say, and a lot of times it's good intentioned on behalf of the congregation, but a really complicated granting process for small nonprofits to have to walk through can be a deterrent. And so there is a fine balance between how much we're giving away and what organizations can navigate with staff time and still be good stewards on applying. So if you're getting lots of requests, that's something to think about. But if you're asking people for grants, I think larger grants are the larger the grant, the more appropriate it is to do a larger process. So just kind of like a boundary there. Mike wants to say something.
Yeah, and just be careful. Oftentimes distribution can take over an endowment team and they forget to keep securing new gifts for it. So that's a caution. The other thing is I find it far harder to give money away than to raise money, like because you're having to make decisions between important things. I am confident that my understanding of governments will conflict with others' understanding. I think for the most part, like a scholarship endowment program, that should be administered by church staff, not by church volunteers. And this all gets back to that first, or one of the earlier comments, as long as the organization knows who it is, then I think for scholarship applications, that's a staff function. You know people better, you can say yes and no. And sometimes you give a team power and it also kind of causes people not to apply. My congregation had nobody apply for any scholarship help this year. And I think it's because of that hindrance of the process involved. So there are things that I think staff should just do, I think. And that's one of them that I think, and I'm confident many of you disagree with me and well, you're wrong, but I mean, that's fine. I'm kidding, but Katie.
Katie, yeah.
I want to ask about how the council leadership can use, or whether they can, or how you can think ahead about how they might want to use the corpus before it is technically available to them. And so let me clarify by telling a story about a congregation that I worked with who had a significant endowment. One of their biggest mistakes was that they were not sufficiently transparent about the restrictions on the endowment and how it operated. So it already tended to depress giving because people just said, oh, well, they've got money sitting in the bank. Why would we give any more? But then when significant expenses came up with regard to the building, then they started borrowing from that because they said they could, always intending, they said, to pay it back at a lower, they could charge themselves a lower interest rate than they would charge if would be charged if they went to the bank. Well, it became just a kind of a rolling problem because, again, if they could use the funds that way, why would the congregation give to a capital campaign to address the building issues? So that became a real issue. And then it became a kind of a race to a date when the core funds was going to reach a maturity date where the restrictions were going to be lifted and it could then be used for building expenses. And they were trying to get to that point so that when the restrictions were lifted, they could pay it back by using those funds, right? Do you see what I mean? It was just, it seemed like a mess to me.
I have something I really want to say, Mike, but you look like you did too. So would you like to go first?
This congregation should never be allowed to have an endowment fund that they manage again.
Yes.
So we've not talked about them, but the In Faith Foundation is more of a community foundation in the Lutheran circles. Any endowment money this congregation has should be kept there, and the In Faith Foundation will make sure that they use it for the right reasons, and if they don't, they won't get the money.
Yeah, good luck convincing them. But
well,
but I would like to know how to head that off at this stage where all of you all are. How to head off that kind of mess, because there were all kinds of harms.
Okay. So I'm going to answer that by starting with a story. I sat across from an endowment committee who had $1 million for music. And they had figured out a way around any kind of language to use that money for their annual operating budget. And the words they used with me at the table were to keep the lights on. Okay. And so it had gotten down to 900,000. And I said, they asked me to come there to help them rework their bylaws. What we got to was so they could use the money for whatever they wanted. And what it ended up being is, and someone at the table said, well, with $900,000, we can be open for 5 more years and then close. But we'll be here for 5 more years. If you are in that position, you need to call Mike or I as soon as we get off of this call. That is unacceptable. That behavior makes it harder for the rest of us. I feel very passionate about this, okay? If all you're doing is bleeding an endowment to keep the lights on, close the doors and give it away. I make no exceptions about that. That will make it harder for everybody. So the way, Katie, you head that off is, number one, this guy, and it was this guy on the committee, had been on the committee for too dang long, number one. So in your governance policies, there has to be transition. There has to be turnover. There has to be change. A good institution changes their board on a regular basis for that reason. Churches should not be an exception, okay? Secondly, if your bylaws are reviewed every year and presented to the congregation, which this was not presented to the congregation needs to be holding people accountable for that behavior. It's unacceptable. Okay, so manage it through a strong governance that opens the door for new life. That also is going to help you get more gifts, just like having 5 people on the team to create the bylaws. When you have new people come on to the endowment committee, that's new people who should be talking about leaving gifts and leaving gifts. And your distribution needs to be clear. And if you're transparent and you're telling the story all along the way, and if you need to, put it in the bylaws that every year we're going to have a celebration of distribution. Nobody's going to celebrate you giving money to keep the lights on, right? So that's how you navigate that. You get it right on the front end. If you are sitting on this call and it's not right in your congregation, I am happy to come in and be the bad guy all day long, because that has to stop. So did that help?
did. Thank you.
Okay.
We've reached the top of the hour. I had a feeling this would have some energetic conversation in it, and it did. So, Mitzi, thanks. I've got a quick summary that I've written up that I will post in everybody's Basecamp folders, along with the recording, along with the article that was promised. I should do that by the end of today. If not, it will be by the end of tomorrow because I'm going to take a week off after that. So I will get it before I go. And so we've got that, and it sounds like we've got great things happening. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you just need some help on this. This is really good stuff that we've got to be about. And as from my story, you know, sometimes you get a little something in somebody's estate. So that'd be great. But thanks so much. I think we had 43 folks on the call today. That's
Oh
fantastic.
my gosh.
That
That's
in the
awesome.
middle of Lent, that many people are paying attention this way. And Jason Snow, at some point I need to know if the UMC Foundation is being helpful the way we keep promoting the ELCA Foundation, but you don't have to do that publicly here. You can, okay.
I have emailed and been directed to someone, and it's been about a week and a half, 2 weeks since I touched base and haven't heard back from them. So we'll see. I'll let you know how. I'm going to reach out again.
Let them know that the ELCA Foundation folks in the DC area will be happy to step in instead. If
I'm going to tell them I'm going Lutheran if they don't, buck up. So let's
Very
give
good, very good.
Yeah.
So anyway, y'all, thanks, and we'll see you after Easter, and look forward to keeping this moving ahead with you.
Okay, and
Thanks,
Mike, I will
everybody.
talk to you in a few minutes.
Bye all.
Bye.
Happy Easter.
Pat, I'll see you with a different meeting link in about
Right.
10 minutes. Great.
Okey doke.